It started the second week after we moved into the house. At first, everything felt normal. The neighborhood was quiet, the kind of suburban street where kids rode bikes during the day and everything went silent after dark. Our backyard was one of the reasons we bought the place. It was large, surrounded by tall wooden fencing, and backed up against a narrow strip of trees that separated our property from an old drainage field. During the day, it looked peaceful, almost relaxing. But the first strange thing happened late one night when I stepped outside to take the trash out. As I walked across the yard, I noticed something near the back fence. At first, I thought it was just a shadow from the trees swaying in the wind. But the wind wasn't moving, and the shadow was standing upright. I froze halfway across the lawn, staring at the fence. The backyard light from the house barely reached that far, but I could clearly see a dark shape on the other side of the wooden boards. It looked like someone standing very still, close enough that their shadow stretched through the gaps between the fence panels. I remember calling out, thinking maybe it was a neighbor or someone walking through the tree line. But the moment I spoke, the shadow shifted slightly and then disappeared. I stood there for another minute, listening carefully, expecting to hear footsteps or branches snapping in the woods. Nothing. Just silence. I brushed it off and went back inside. But the next night, it happened again. This time, I wasn't outside. I was in the kitchen grabbing a drink when I glanced through the sliding glass door toward the yard. The backyard light was on, and near the fence I saw the same thing again. A tall shadow, perfectly still, cast across the wood panels as if someone was standing directly behind them. My stomach tightened instantly. I stepped closer to the glass door and stared harder. The shadow didn't move. It didn't shift. It just stayed there like someone was standing and watching the house. I opened the door slowly and stepped onto the patio. The moment my foot touched the concrete, the shadow disappeared again. Just gone. No sound, no movement. I walked all the way across the yard and checked the fence line. There was nobody there. The woods behind the fence were quiet and empty. That's when I started noticing the third thing. Footprints. They were faint in the dirt near the fence, barely visible under the grass, but they were definitely there. Someone had been standing there long enough to press their shoes into the soil. For the next few nights, I kept checking the yard before going to bed. Sometimes nothing happened. Sometimes the yard looked completely normal. But every few nights, right around the same time after midnight, the shadow would return, standing behind the fence, perfectly still, watching. After about a week of this, I decided to install a small motion camera facing the back fence. I mounted it near the patio door so it had a clear view of the entire yard. The first 2 nights, the camera recorded nothing unusual, just raccoons passing through and tree branches moving. But on the third night, the motion alert triggered at 2:11 a.m. I checked the footage the next morning. At first, the video looked normal. The empty backyard sat under the porch light, completely still. Then, about 15 seconds into the clip, a figure slowly stepped into view behind the fence. My chest tightened immediately. The camera angle didn't show the person directly, but their shadow stretched across the wooden panels exactly the same way I had seen it every night. The figure stood there for nearly a full minute, not moving, just standing. Then something happened that made my stomach drop. The shadow lifted an arm, slowly, and pointed directly toward the house, toward the camera. Then it moved closer to the fence, closer than it had ever been before. The shadow grew larger as the person leaned forward, pressing against the wood. I could see the outline of their head clearly now through the gaps between the boards. Then the shadow tilted, like they were looking directly at the camera. And suddenly the figure spoke. It was faint, barely audible through the outdoor microphone, but the words were clear enough to understand. "I know you're watching." The recording ended seconds later when the motion detection stopped. That night, I went outside with a flashlight and walked the entire fence line again. That's when I noticed something I hadn't seen before. One of the fence boards near the corner had a small hole drilled into it. A perfect round hole, at eye level. Someone had been standing there, looking through it, directly into our backyard, directly at our house. We called the police the next day and they searched the woods behind the property. About 50 yards into the trees, they found a small clearing hidden behind thick brush. Inside the clearing were empty food wrappers, cigarette butts, and a cheap folding chair facing our backyard. Someone had been sitting there, watching our house, watching us, for days, maybe weeks. But the thing that still bothers me the most is what the officer said before he left. He told us something strange about the footprints they found near the chair. There were only one set of footprints leading into the clearing, but none leading back out. And sometimes late at night, when the wind is completely still, I still see a shadow move behind the fence, standing exactly where it used to, watching the house again.
Before we move on to the next story, give us your verdict on this one, and don't forget to like and subscribe.
The shed had already been there when we bought the house. It sat at the far corner of the backyard, half hidden behind an old maple tree, and surrounded by tall grass that hadn't been trimmed in years. The previous owner mentioned it briefly during the house tour, saying it was just for storage and hadn't been used much. At the time, it didn't seem important. It was just an old wooden shed with faded paint and a rusted latch. For the first few weeks after moving in, we barely paid attention to it. The backyard was big enough that the shed almost blended into the background, something you noticed during the day but forgot about once the sun went down. The first strange thing happened late one evening when I was sitting in the living room watching TV. The sliding glass door faced the backyard, and from the couch, I could see most of the lawn and the shed beyond it. It was around midnight when I noticed a faint glow coming from the small window on the side of the shed. At first, I assumed it was just a reflection from our house lights, or maybe a passing car. But the light stayed there. It wasn't bright, just a dim yellow glow flickering faintly inside the shed. I remember getting up and walking closer to the glass door to get a better look. The backyard itself was completely dark except for the porch light near the house, but the small window of the shed definitely had light inside it. That didn't make sense. There was no electricity connected to the shed. I had checked that myself the week we moved in. Curious, I stepped outside and walked across the yard. The grass felt damp beneath my feet as I moved slowly toward the structure, listening for any sounds. Everything was silent except for insects in the trees. As I got closer, the light inside the shed disappeared, just like that. I reached the door and stood there for a moment. The rusted latch was still hooked exactly the way I had left it earlier that day. I lifted it slowly and pulled the door open. The shed was completely dark. The inside smelled like old wood and dust. Gardening tools leaned against one wall, and a broken lawn chair sat in the corner. There was nothing inside that could produce light. I checked the entire shed with my flashlight just to be sure. Nothing. I closed the door and walked back to the house, feeling slightly uneasy, but convinced I must have imagined it. But the next night, the light came back. This time it was brighter. I noticed it again through the glass door while standing in the kitchen. The small shed window glowed faintly against the darkness of the yard, like someone had lit a candle inside. My heart started beating faster. I grabbed a flashlight and stepped outside again, walking toward the shed slowly. And once again, as soon as I got halfway across the lawn, the light went out. When I opened the door, the shed was empty. The same tools, the same broken chair. No light, no explanation. The third night, something changed. I saw the light again, but this time it didn't go out when I stepped outside. It stayed on. I moved across the yard slowly, keeping my eyes fixed on the window. The glow flickered gently as if coming from a small lantern or candle. But when I got closer, I realized something else. There was movement. A shadow moved inside the shed. My stomach dropped instantly. Someone was in there. I stopped walking and called out across the yard, trying to sound confident even though my voice felt tight. Hello? Who's there? The shadow inside the shed froze, then slowly moved again. I started backing toward the house, my eyes still locked on the door. Then the shed door creaked open, but nobody stepped out. The inside was dark again. The light was gone. The door just hung open slightly, moving back and forth in the breeze. I called the police that night. 2 officers arrived about 20 minutes later and searched the shed thoroughly. They found no one inside and no sign of forced entry. The officers assumed someone had been trespassing and probably ran when they saw me approaching. Before they left, one of them checked the ground around the shed with a flashlight. That's when he noticed something strange. Footprints, but not around the shed. Inside it, the dirt floor had several shoe prints pressed into it, like someone had been standing there recently. The officer followed the prints carefully with his light, expecting them to lead out the door. But they didn't. The footprints stopped in the center of the shed. Just stopped. No exit, no direction. Like whoever made them had simply vanished. The officers left shortly after that, telling me to call again if anything else happened. For the next few nights, I kept the backyard lights on. The shed stayed dark. Nothing moved. Eventually, I convinced myself the whole thing had just been a trespasser who managed to slip away unnoticed. Until one night about a week later when I woke up suddenly around 3 a.m. I don't know what woke me, but something felt wrong. I got out of bed and walked quietly to the window that faced the backyard. The porch light was still on. The lawn looked normal, but the shed door was open again. And inside the darkness of the shed, there was a small yellow light glowing once more. But this time I could clearly see something standing in front of it. A silhouette, perfectly still, facing the house, watching the window, watching me. I stepped away from the window slowly, my heart pounding in my chest. When I looked again a few seconds later, the light was gone, the shed door was closed, and the backyard was empty. The next morning I went out to the shed again in daylight. I opened the door and checked the inside carefully. The dirt floor was untouched. Except for one thing. In the center of the shed, right where the footprints had stopped before, someone had carved a message into the dirt with a stick. 3 simple words. I live here.
Before we move on to the next story, give us your verdict on this one, and don't forget to like and subscribe.
When we moved into the house, the backyard was the first thing everyone commented on. It was huge, much larger than the typical yards in our area, and it stretched back into a small tree line that bordered an empty field. During the day it felt peaceful, almost like having a small park behind the house. But at night, the yard felt completely different. The trees blocked most of the streetlights, leaving the entire back half of the property in near total darkness. After a few weeks of living there, my wife suggested installing a security camera facing the backyard. Not because anything had happened, but just for peace of mind. The camera was mounted under the edge of the roof above the sliding glass door, so it had a full view of the lawn, the fence, and the trees behind it. It was motion activated and sent alerts directly to my phone whenever something moved. For the first few nights it worked exactly as expected. The alerts were mostly harmless things. Raccoons crossing the yard, wind moving tree branches, once even a stray cat walking along the fence line. But about 2 weeks after installing the camera, I woke up early one morning to a notification that had come in around 3:08 a.m. Motion detected. I opened the camera footage while still lying in bed. At first, the video looked completely normal. The backyard sat quietly under the dim porch light, the grass barely visible beyond the edge of the patio. Then about 10 seconds into the recording, something moved near the tree line. A tall figure stepped partially into view. I immediately sat up in bed. The person was standing at the far edge of the yard where the trees began. They weren't moving toward the house. They were just standing there, half hidden in shadow, watching. I assumed it was someone passing through the field behind the property, maybe a late-night walker who had wandered too close to the fence. But the person didn't leave. They didn't even move. They stood there for the entire 30 seconds of the recording, just watching the house. The camera stopped recording when the motion detection ended. The next night another alert came, same time, 3:07 a.m. This time the figure was closer. Still near the trees, but a few steps farther into the yard than before. Standing still again, facing the house. The strange thing was how they stood. completely motionless. No shifting weight, no pacing, no phone in their hand, nothing. Just standing there like a statue. The camera recorded them for 40 seconds before the clip ended. The third night, I decided to stay awake. I sat in the living room with the lights off and the phone app open so I could watch the backyard camera live. Around 3 a.m., the yard looked empty. 3:05 passed, then 3:06, and suddenly the camera detected motion. The figure stepped out of the trees again, except this time I could see them more clearly. They were wearing dark clothes and standing with their arms at their sides, staring directly toward the house. My heart started racing. I watched the live feed carefully. For nearly a full minute, the person didn't move. Then something happened that made my stomach drop. The figure slowly raised their head and looked directly into the camera. And then they smiled. Not a normal smile. A wide, unnatural smile that looked wrong even through the grainy night footage. I grabbed a flashlight and stepped onto the patio immediately, pointing the beam across the lawn. The yard was empty. The tree line was still. There was no one there. I walked all the way to the back fence with the flashlight and searched the area carefully. Nothing. No movement, no sound, no footprints. I convinced myself whoever it was must have run away the moment I stepped outside. But the next morning, I checked the footage again. And that's when I noticed something that I had missed the night before. At the end of the recording, right before the clip stopped, the figure wasn't just looking at the camera. They were pointing directly toward the side of the house, toward another window, our bedroom window. That night, I checked the backyard camera again before going to bed. There were no alerts. Everything looked normal. But just before midnight, I decided to check the live feed anyway. The backyard was empty. The lawn was quiet. But something else caught my attention. The camera view had changed slightly. The angle was lower than before, almost like the camera had been tilted downward. I went outside immediately to check it. When I looked up at the camera, my blood ran cold. The lens had been turned. Not toward the backyard, but toward the house, toward the sliding door, toward the inside of the living room. Someone had climbed onto our patio and physically rotated the camera. The worst part came when I checked the recorded footage from earlier that evening. The camera had captured a short clip just before midnight. The recording showed someone standing directly beneath the camera, so close that their face filled most of the frame. It was the same person from the yard, still smiling, still staring directly into the lens. And just before the video ended, they leaned closer to the camera and whispered something. The audio barely picked it up, but when I turned the volume all the way up, I could hear it clearly. 3 quiet words. I see you. The police searched the yard and the nearby field the next day, but never found anyone. No footprints, no signs of entry. Nothing. We moved out of that house 3 months later. But sometimes when I check old files on my phone, I still see that final camera clip saved in the cloud. And every time I watch it again, I notice something new. Because right behind the smiling man, standing in the darkness of the yard, there's another figure. Watching him. Watching the house. Watching the camera.
If you made it this far, thank you for spending your night with us. If these stories gave you chills, there are plenty more waiting. Don't forget to subscribe to Night Fear Stories so that you are able to enjoy upcoming content on the channel. Good night and sleep well if you can.